Hello, 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 and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, where my guest is Michael Cohen, formerly columnist of the Boston Globe, now running his own independent Substack, Truth and Consequences, regular guest here on the program, and today we talked for almost an hour and a half. Didn't edit it down at all. It is a long conversation and argument at times about what is happening in Israel, how we should feel about it, think about it, deal with it, and I hope that you like it. That is coming up, but first, I've got a bit of a news update for you, but not long, because I don't know who has the time or interest in listening to an 80-minute conversation that I had with Michael, but I did want to put it out there for everybody in full context to hear and listen to. But I'd like to start where yesterday started, which is that we all woke up to learn that another one of Donald Trump's lawyers had pled guilty to charges as part of his cooperation agreement with the Fulton County, Georgia District Attorney's Office. Yesterday morning, it was Jenna Ellis. Remember her? She pled guilty to aiding and abetting false statements and writings as part of the plan to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. She is now the fourth of the 19 people charged in Georgia racketeering case to plead guilty. I like what the Lincoln Project did to mash up the whole how it started, how it's going for Jenna Ellis.
In the wake of the 2020 presidential election,
Democrats are trying to manipulate the election.
I relied on others, including lawyers with many more years of experience than I, to provide me with true and reliable information.
You can get a bunch of lawyers to say anything, and they don't actually know what justice requires.
What I did not do, but should have done, Your Honor, was to make sure that the facts the other lawyers alleged to be true were in fact true.
This was a statement of fact that was ran as true, and when in fact it was knowingly false.
I failed to do my due diligence.
And they never reached out to the campaign to verify.
In the frenetic pace of attempting to raise challenges,
we've done this on a very short time frame, and I'm very proud of all of the efforts of the Trump legal team.
If I knew then what I know now, I would have declined to represent Donald Trump.
Trump could literally cure cancer, and the Democrats would find something wrong with it.
I look back on this full experience with deep remorse.
Of course they knew, and they ran with these false statements anyway.
I have taken responsibility already before the Colorado bar who censured me.
She should be disbarred over this.
And I now take responsibility before this court and apologize to the people of Georgia.
Ultimately, our system of government will triumph because we have a wonderful constitution that is in place to protect that.
All right. There you go. That's the Lincoln Project mashed up that video of Jenna Ellis's statements then and now. And then late last night, I mean, that's how the day started. And then we found out that later last night, I think it was ABC News had the scoop, that former President Donald Trump's final chief of staff in the White House, Mark Meadows, has spoken with special counsel Jack Smith's team at least 3 times this year, including once before a federal grand jury, which came only after Jack Smith granted Meadows immunity to testify under oath, according to sources familiar. Ex-chief of staff Mark Meadows granted immunity, telling special counsel he warned Trump about 2020 claims, according to sources at ABC. So those were the bookends of the day in the news on Trump's legal problems, and they are getting more and more serious literally every day. And yesterday in his civil case in New York, his older sons, 2 employees of the Trump Organization, are on trial for fraud. President Trump's former lawyer and former fixer, Michael Cohen, the other one, testified today that he and the former chief financial officer of Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg, would reverse engineer Trump's financial statements to meet whatever number Trump wanted. His testimony suggested that the alleged massive fortune on which Trump based his identity as well as his presidential bid was an illusion. So everybody was talking about that yesterday. I'll be talking with Glenn Kirshner tomorrow about that. Now let's head over to Capitol Hill, where in the House, they still don't have a speaker, but they do have another nominee, another victim for embarrassment. This time it's Mike Johnson, who is from Louisiana. He is the latest Republican nominee for the House Speaker on Tuesday. He got 128 votes in the House Republican Conference. Byron Donalds got 29 votes. And former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who was ousted earlier this month, he himself got 43 votes. So he's back in the mix now? At one point, they were floating the idea that yesterday afternoon that Kevin McCarthy was going to be the speaker again with an assistant speaker of Jim Jordan, which apparently is not happening. Who knows? Can't figure it out. Of course, he was the 4th congressman to be selected as the nominee. Before that, it was Tom Emmer. He went down quickly yesterday when Trump shanked him. Jim Jordan, Steve Scalise, of course. They're all out of the running, one would think, but who knows? Maybe we'll come back to one of these guys. You know what? Jamie Raskin said it yesterday really well. He recapped all the chaos in the Oversight Committee yesterday. Jamie Raskin just actually quoted Republicans in their own words, which was pretty brilliant, and had huge placards up behind him with those quotes on them. Listen to this.
One can only regard with amazement that any member of the Republican Party today would lecture the commissioner of the IRS about efficiency or organization or anything else. Look at what the Republicans are saying about the Republicans today on Capitol Hill as we live through all of the reverberations of the Chaos Caucus. So the world is burning around us. We're fiddling. We don't have a strategy. That's Representative Steve Womack, Republican from Louisiana. We're fractured, says a member of this committee, Representative Anna Luna from Florida. It's not a normal majority, says Representative Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma. Here's Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about the Republicans. This conference is absolutely broken. Here's Kevin McCarthy, who used to be Speaker before he was deposed by the Republicans. This is embarrassing for the Republican Party. It's embarrassing for the nation. Here's Representative David Joyce from Ohio, who probably sums it up best. We're a party that can't govern. Here's Representative Troy Niels from Texas. We're a broken conference. Representative Tom Emmer said, if it were a family, quote, we'd be the most dysfunctional family on the face of the planet. Here's Representative Austin Scott, who ran briefly for Speaker in the speakership sweepstakes taking place right now. It makes us look like a bunch of idiots. And Representative Mark Alford from Michigan, another Republican, we are a ship that doesn't have a rudder right now. So it would be great if we could actually get a Speaker of the House and a functioning House of Representatives so we could deal with these issues.
Another superstar, rising star who's running for Senate. I guess he's risen, maybe. Katie Porter at that same hearing. This is a hearing called by Republicans, by the way, for oversight on the IRS. Here's Katie Porter.
Sit in yet another Republican-led hearing to attack the IRS instead of making it work better. Other Republicans are off slashing our entire Congress at the same time. They've stopped Congress from doing its work because they haven't been able to elect a Speaker of the House, so we can't pass any legislation. The most opportunistic Republicans have spent so long attacking our government that now Republicans don't even trust each other. But that's what the opportunists wanted. A weak Congress, a weak IRS. It's what they call smart government. But in reality, it's a federal government that can't serve its people. Right now, the opportunists are creating that reality.
All right, well, we'll see what happens today with the fight between Republicans in the House to elect a new speaker. Republican Mike Johnson is the man whose name is being, by the time I get this out there, maybe we will have somebody else. The villain from the Karate Kid movies, I don't know. 10 hours, 2 nominees. It's absolute chaos on Capitol Hill. Still no House Speaker. But we'll see what happens on Wednesday. And now to the violence in Israel and Gaza, which is definitely getting worse. Hamas rockets now targeting Tel Aviv. Apparently Syria is joining in. The Pentagon sending more for the Iron Dome defense system, and so many more headlines from yesterday. Israel now saying, or rather U.S. intelligence now saying with high confidence in their assessment that Israel was not responsible for the Gaza hospital explosion. U.S. continuing to engage in ongoing talks to release numbers of hostages. At least 1,400 people have died and 4,629 others have been injured in Israel, according to Israeli authorities. In Gaza, 5,791 people apparently have been killed. 16,297 have been injured, according to the Palestinian Health Authority. I'd question both those numbers in the fog of war plus propaganda. Nations always do this in conflicts. It's terrible. Aid workers and officials fear that Israel's call for evacuation of the northern part of Gaza is precipitating a humanitarian disaster as electricity and other supplies have been cut off in preparation for what appears to be an imminent ground offensive. And Michael Cohen and I talk about more of that today. So I'm going to get to that right now. Before I do, I want to say something nice, which actually comes from a listener named Frank Grande, who I really appreciate you, Frank. This is such a nice email that I got last night, and a lot of people really loved my conversation with David Roberts, and I'm going to try to continue to talk about issues other than Israeli Gaza. But Frank emailed me yesterday at standupwithpete@gmail.com and said, hey, I just finished listening to your show with Tim Wise, and all I could say is, wow, I find myself saying that a lot about the show. I've spent 28 years of my life in public service, and for a short 10-year period in aerospace, I always thought of myself as a smart, well-informed, and astute observer of foreign affairs. However, what I find when I listen to your show is my priors are challenged, and I'm always enlightened by your guests. I may not always agree with what they say, but I always learn something from them. Bill Boyle, Michael Cohen, Jared Yates Sexton, Glenn Kirshner, Eric Siegel, and Tim Wise, just to name a few, are thoughtful. And you, sir, bring out the very best in all of your guests through your thoughtful questioning. You're a fantastic interviewer, Pete. And as a listener to the old show on SiriusXM and a subscriber to this podcast, the monthly subscription cost is the best value for the money in all of podcasts. Thank you for all you do day in and day out. Sincerely, Frank. Frank, thank you. Now I don't have to read the Patreon plugs. That just about did it. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Join Frank and I and hang out with us tomorrow night or anytime on the Discord channel, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. But now let's get to my conversation with Michael. Just a note about the conversation on the Middle East, the Arab-Israeli conflict. I've been talking to people about this for over 10 years. I've been talking to Israelis, to Jewish people, to Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, scholars, journalists, activists. I've read about it. I've thought about it. I've cried about it, actually, recently when all of these deaths first happened. But my approach to this issue, to this topic, is to try to keep my mind open to the boundaries of what can be said, what can't be said, to try to create some context, to try to listen to a lot of different perspectives. Some of you know I've talked to you off the air about this. I'm definitely not someone who thinks I know the answers, how to solve this conflict. Never have. I'm definitely someone who thinks that it's going to be really hard to solve this conflict, if it can be ever solved. But I'm doing my best to understand this, and I want to continue to have a conversation with people coming from different perspectives in hopes that we can someday find a way for the people of Israel to live in security while the people in Gaza don't live in a regime of oppression, humiliation, immiseration, and terror, is how one journalist put it. And I'm not sure if I accomplished any of that in this 80-minute conversation with Michael Cohen. I'm super curious to see what and hear what those of you who listen to this whole conversation think. So email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Michael's a good friend, an old friend. It gets fraught at times, but we keep the humor as much as possible in this conversation. Michael is, of course, active on social media, on Twitter as SpeechBoy71. You can read his Substack and subscribe there. A discount for stand-up members, truthandcons.substack.com. Ladies and gentlemen, here we go with Michael Cohen.
Is here, and there is a lot for him to say. He certainly, I think, is going to give us a different perspective than we've gotten from Jonathan Alter, Naira Haq, Wajahat Ali, Tim Wise, and even Aaron David Miller, because similar maybe to Jonathan Alter, you have been very sensitive and thoughtful and hurt in your writing. You even said the first piece you wrote after the terrorist attack in Israel was, I've been told not to write when I'm emotional. Talk to me about how you have felt emotionally since that day.
So I think there's two things that are going on here. One is, I've lived in Israel. I lived in a kibbutz not far from where these atrocities took place, and I have a lot of friends in Israel. I have a real connection to the place. My brother lives there with his family, his 3 kids. I have cousins who live there. So it's a place that is extremely important to me, and it's a place where and that's true, I think, for a lot of Jews. Not just ones who have relatives there. I think there is a bond between Israel and American Jews that is very important and very special and very enduring. And so I think this is one of these moments that, unites Jews together. I think the second thing about it was, I'll say there's three things, actually. The second thing is that, what happened in southern Israel, the massacre, pogrom, was, I think for a lot of Jews, very reminiscent of the stories that we've heard about what happened to Jews in Eastern Europe, for much of the last hundreds of years. And that's before the Holocaust. Villages being invaded, Jews being killed in sort of these bloodthirsty and barbaric ways, children, old people being killed. So I think it's very triggering for a lot of Jews to sort of read about this. And I think it's even more triggering because it happens in a place where Jews are supposed to be safe, which is Israel, obviously. So to have the worst bout of violence against Jews since the Holocaust happen in Israel, in which Israel's army was not there to protect the Jewish people, I think it's for a lot of people, it's pretty upsetting. And the last thing is, and I think this is the really maybe the more what the thing we're going to talk about today, is the deep sense of betrayal and abandonment that so many Jews I've spoken to in the past 2 weeks feel from the progressive left. And it is, look, I have written a lot of pieces in the past about how I think the left doesn't take anti-Semitism seriously, doesn't consider Jews to be equal as far as a vulnerable minority group. I think what in the last 2 weeks sort of proves the point that Jews don't count. It's a great book by David Baddiel, as a comedian in the UK, called Jews Don't Count, which sort of makes this point. And I think we've seen this, in a way that I think I knew but was still surprised by, the extent to which progressives basically quickly cried crocodile tears over all the Israelis who were killed, and then immediately pivoted to talking about the Palestinians in Gaza, and made just offensive and outlandish claims against Israel of genocide, of ethnic cleansing, which is both historically ignorant and also deeply offensive to people who have actually experienced genocide, and literally 2 weeks ago experienced a genocidal style attack by Hamas. So I think, it's a difficult time for a lot of American Jews. And I think one of the points I tried to make in my most recent piece is there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of angry Jews in this country right now. A lot of angry, abandoned, betrayed Jews who feel as though people who are supposed to be our allies, we're supposed to look out and support Jews, particularly at times like this, have completely abandoned us.
So many things that I want to follow up on. When you say you think that the attack has united Jews, well, actually differentiate, if you want, or push back on even the question between Israelis and is it diaspora or diaspora? Diaspora. Wow, I got them both wrong. Diaspora. I always get it wrong. Okay. Can you differentiate between Israeli Jews and the diaspora of Jews around the world? Because there's a lot of data that I feel like I've read that, like, younger people who are Jewish that don't live in Israel don't necessarily have the same connection to or support of. And then, there seems to be, and maybe this is just overplayed by media, a lot of people who are Jewish who are being very critical of Israel that don't seem to be necessarily, quote, unified. So
let me put, this is kind of a complicated question to answer.
Yeah.
I think there is always a cross section of American Jews and diaspora Jews who are critical of Israel, myself included, by the way. I've written pieces harshly critical of Israel's policies vis-a-vis the Palestinians, harshly critical of their policies regarding settlements, which I find settlements to be rather indefensible. So I think, there's an old joke about if you get 10 Jews in a room, you get 11 opinions.
Yeah.
So I think that you have a lot of different points of view, but I think you have a lot of people who are critical of Israel. However, I think what happened this week has had a galvanizing effect for a lot of Jews, because no matter what you may say critically of Israel, or may disagree with Israel's policies, nothing that happened in this, barbarism is justifiable. Nothing Israel has done justifies it. And frankly, I think for a lot of people, it justifies why Israel has taken on such harsh security measures vis-a-vis the Palestinians. because this is the threat Israel faces from groups like Hamas. I mean, Hamas invaded Israel, basically, and their priority was to kill as many Jews as possible. But I want to repeat that. Their goal was to kill as many Jews, not Jewish soldiers, not attack military targets, to attack kibbutzim, to attack people's homes, and to kill Jews in their homes. And not, by the way, adults, not men, women, children, old people, babies. Okay? So I think that it's important to understand that that has a huge galvanizing effect for Jews. And what I've been struck by is how many liberal Jews, how many Jews who are harshly critical of Netanyahu and the Israeli government, who have basically come together and said, you know, this is different. And this merits a different reaction. And we are not going to sit and accept this idea that somehow Israel's to blame for this, because it's not. And frankly, you know, the idea that Israel's to blame, this is a trope that Jews have dealt with for centuries. We have been blamed consistently for our own suffering. In the Holocaust, people said it was our fault. Well, we antagonized the German Jews. You know, look, earlier, a couple of years ago, in Jersey City, New Jersey, there was a Orthodox supermarket that was attacked by some black Israelites. They killed about 5 or 6 people. And you had people in the community who literally blamed Orthodox Jews for coming in the neighborhood, which was a black neighborhood, and gentrifying it, and somehow it was their fault. So this is a recurrent trope. The Jews somehow are responsible for their own suffering. And when I think a lot of Jews, when they hear this, their response is, you know, to be very blunt, F you. My people's suffering matters too.
One of the things I've seen is that Netanyahu propped up Hamas forever in as many ways as they could to keep the Palestinians divided, which is why a huge percentage of Israelis are calling for his resignation. And so analysis isn't justification, but he didn't keep Israelis safe, seems to be what I'm hearing. What are you hearing from your brother and other Israelis about not like blaming him for the attack? Again, analysis isn't justification, but calling for his resignation. How do you see that? How do you see the I think it's pretty well documented based on what I've seen from different journalists in Israel that he did in fact want to keep Hamas in power, to keep them divided, and started to just want to contain them.
So let me answer that by saying I think it's important to make a distinction between Israel and Netanyahu. It's like saying that America is Trump. We know that's not true. We know there are plenty of Americans who don't like Trump. And I always sort of recoil when I hear people sort of make this kind of broad claim that Netanyahu is the same or synonymous with Israel. He's not. He just happens to be the prime minister. Having said that, I don't know that there's a figure in Israeli, more unpopular right now than Benjamin Netanyahu. And, you know, Haaretz, which is one of the best newspapers in Israel, it's a liberal-leaning newspaper, basically said he was solely responsible for the attack on October 7th. I think that goes too far, but I would certainly say he deserves a lion's share of the responsibility. He did not keep the South safe. He didn't keep Israeli citizens safe. He ignored the situation in Gaza, because he was focused on this ridiculous idea of reforming the justice system, which basically would have turned Israel into a quasi-democracy. He was focused on the West Bank and with settlements. And you're right. He has spent years basically building up Hamas because Hamas plays his political interests. As long as Hamas exists, it makes it much easier for Netanyahu to say, I can't make compromises with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank because, you know, Hamas is still out there. So, you know, again, I don't want to take the blame away from Hamas because obviously they have agency, and we need to, a lot of times this debate, we sort of ignore the agency of the Palestinians and of Hamas, but they have agency. But I am certainly one who thinks Bibi deserves a lot of the blame, and he needs to go sooner rather than later. And that's a view, by the way, held by a majority of Israelis.
Let me go back to your article at MSNBC, and you reference this. American Jews must demand more from our progressive allies. You said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing earlier, something about the Jews are equally vulnerable. What do you mean by that? What are you talking about?
What I mean is that we are a vulnerable minority in this country.
In America.
in America. In fact, there are more hate crimes against Jews than any other ethnic group in America. More than Arabs. I don't think more than blacks, but I'm not sure. But there's been we are one of the most targeted minority groups in America. There's been a significant increase in anti-Semitic violence since Trump became president in 2017. To be very candid, a lot of that violence comes from communities of color, particularly the black community. If you look at what's happening in New York, the overwhelming majority of anti-Semitic violence against Jews in New York, and Brooklyn in particular, came from black people, not from right-wingers, excuse me. And I think one point I make in the piece that makes me a little bit crazy is that when there is right-wing violence against Jews, which certainly happens, you saw this at the Tree of Life Synagogue in 2000, I believe it was 18 or 19, synagogue in Pittsburgh, in which I think 11 people were killed by a white right-wing anti-immigrant terrorist. The outcry from the left was enormous. But when you see incidents, like I mentioned earlier, in Jersey City, stabbing in Muncie, New York, or just generalized anti-Semitism from the left, it tends to get ignored or glossed over or explained away, or some context is provided. There's a problem in this country on the left of an acceptance of anti-Semitism. And I don't want to paint with a broad brush. It isn't just communities of color. You see this in college campuses around the country. You saw this after October 7th.
Here's why I have a hard time with that. As a bald person who's been marginalized, as you know, I'm just conscious.
But arguably, that is appropriate marginalization.
Fair enough. Yeah. I'm just trying to be cognizant of the fact that I'm not and have never been marginalized as a result of who I am or how I identify. Sure. Certainly not in any kind of systemic way. But the problem I have is if we're talking about violent acts, that's one thing. But I guess I have a hard time understanding how a Jewish man and a black man have the same kind of level of persecution systemically, which is how I focus on things. Jews aren't targeted systemically by laws, by voting laws.
Absolutely.
By voting laws?
No, they're not. I'm agreeing with you. You're right.
Okay, so like when you say equally vulnerable in America, I would argue, and this is always an uncomfortable conversation for anybody, much less people who belong to marginalized groups. So certainly is for me, and I hope people will react to it that listen to it. But like, I don't love the competition of suffering. But if you're going to force me to engage in it,
this isn't a competition, Pete. Well, I'm not saying it's competition.
When you say you're equally vulnerable as a Jewish person to a black person, that I find that really troublesome.
I think I understand that.
Because it's not systemic. If you were wearing, if you were identifying as a Jewish person, then maybe we could talk about it going down the street, or if you were in your house of worship and so on. But all the things that happen to Jewish people happen to black folks, but way more happens to black folks, much less indigenous people, systemically. Laws.
That's a very fair point. But I don't think you want to get into a competition of suffering. And I think
you're the one who brought it up.
Here, there should not be a hierarchy of who suffers more.
But I agree. But I feel like that's what you're saying when you say we're.
I'm not saying that. Okay. No, I'm not saying that. Okay. And I don't think it's even a relevant conversation to have. I think the point is that Jews suffer inordinate amount of discrimination in American society, more than most other ethnic and racial groups. That's simply a fact. Certainly more documented more than even Arab Americans suffer, percentage-wise. You go to any synagogue in this country right now, there are armed guards and police outside the synagogue.
No doubt.
It is a fact of life.
Yeah.
And for many Jews, myself included, the memories of the Holocaust are not really even memories. I mean, they are part of my upbringing, because I had relatives who had suffered from the Nazis, who lost their families in the Holocaust. These are events that are very triggering and they're very emotional for American Jews. And so the point I'm going to get at here is that we are not. I think there's a sense out there that because we have white skin, we have white privilege, and that simply isn't true. We are not white. We're off-white, the way I always put it. We're like,
But hold on a second. I'm way out of my depth here. But there is certainly a privilege with whiteness.
Absolutely.
You do. Two things can be true, right? You do have a privilege when you identify and pass for as a white person. I mean, which most Jewish people I know do in America.
I think the point is that on the surface, yes, but that sort of clouds the fact that Jews are still a vulnerable minority and still targeted in a way that other people with white skin are not.
I think that's true.
I mean, there are, as I said, I mean, I can't think of an analogy for this, but when synagogues are being stormed and attacked, and this has happened, by the way, not just in Pittsburgh, but other places, that's because we're Jewish. And frankly, what's happening in Israel and why this is so triggering for so many people is that Hamas's opposition to Israel is as much to do with the fact that they're Jews as they are Israelis. I mean, there was an interesting report. I don't know if you saw this yesterday, but Israel streamed some of the GoPro footage that Hamas took while they were massacring Jews. One of the things that,
go ahead.
And so one of the clips was of a Palestinian figure calling his mother and telling him that he had killed 10 Jews, not 10 Israelis, 10 Jews. So I think it's important to understand that the violence perpetrated against Israelis, you may see Israelis, I think most Jews see as the violence perpetrated against Jews, and violence that is I don't want to say systemic because that's not really true, but certainly that has a long enduring legacy in history of this kind of violence perpetrated on Jews. So I think the point I'm trying to get at here is that you're absolutely right. We have certain levels of protection because we have white skin, so we are not in the same position as African Americans, as Hispanics, as other people of color, as actual people of color. But at the same time, we are still a vulnerable minority, and we need to be able to rely on other minority groups who we have allied ourselves with to stand up for us. I mean, we have consistently stood up. Jews consistently stood up in the civil rights movement. We stood up for civil rights in this country. And I think what was so disappointing for a lot of American Jews after what happened October 7th was that the people that we've allied ourselves with were not there for us.
I see. That's the thing. I don't like that when you say that, because, and you've written that a couple times, and I'll let you spell it out, because it's the same thing. I've done this a million times. The same person who thinks this, then doesn't think that. Like, who are you specifically talking about? And if you talk about one or two or three individual people, then name their names. But like when you included like the Black Lives Matter chapter posting something pro-Palestinian in your Substack, and when other people talked about Black Lives Matter on this issue, I was aghast at that. Black Lives Matter is not a thing. It's not organized. It's not organized. It's not centralized. Every community has a black movement. Every community has a BLM movement or not, but they're all separate. They don't speak for each other. And the idea that Black Lives Matter, anybody quoting Black Lives Matter is always losing, because it doesn't represent. It's very not centralized.
First of all, look, that is a I don't know. That feels like a cop out, frankly. Especially since that was posted on BLM's Twitter site, and they took it down.
Who's BLM? But the BLM's Twitter site.
These are actual groups. They don't just exist in the ether. They're actual activist groups.
They are activist groups, but they don't represent not even remotely close to anybody who identifies.
They represent that BLM movement,
right? But it doesn't. That'd be like saying some Jewish group that says something about black people.
Did I say that all BLM? Excuse me. Wait,
I'm not saying you said that.
Hold on. Let me get a word in edgewise here. I didn't say all BLM chapters hate Jews. That one did. And look, I mean, the way you're describing this is just somehow like there weren't demonstrations in college campuses across the country that were basically pro-Hamas demonstrations. That at Harvard, people didn't sign a letter.
There was a ton of Jewish kids.
Responsibility that the Democratic Socialists for America had a which, by the way, has a huge Jewish membership, organized an event in New York, or supported an event in New York. There was basically a pro-Hamas rally.
Yeah.
Right. The point is, BLM is a movement that Jews have supported in this country. We have been supportive of them. And to see a BLM chapter basically put this on their Twitter feed is disgusting. And then, by the way, when they took it down, they didn't even really apologize for it.
I agree with that. I agree with and I think DSA is a lot more organized than BLM for sure, but also
I don't know if that's true, but maybe.
Maybe not. Maybe. But also a lot of DSA are actually Jewish people.
They are.
So that's why I think
I could have a whole conversation I probably can't have on camera about what I think about the Jews who were demonstrating in the Capitol last week asking for a ceasefire. There's a word that comes to mind. I'm not going to use it, but it's pretty objectionable to a lot of American Jews. Look, you can look, Pete. This is what makes me a little bit crazy about this. You're sitting here and you're questioning, if I got up here as a black person and said, I feel X, Y, and Z, you wouldn't begin interrogating me as to whether or not my feelings were inaccurate. You would say, well, I empathize with what you're feeling. Why, as a Jew, do I have to explain, the sense of vulnerability, the sense of abandonment that I feel? I don't know any other minority group that the left would make that kind of a qualification for. I shouldn't have to explain why it is that we feel vulnerable. We do feel vulnerable.
I don't think that's what's happening.
Friends of mine.
I don't think that's what's happening.
Friends over this, I've seen people take positions that I find abhorrent.
Right. So I don't think that's what's happening in our conversation. But
I don't think you hate Jews, Pete.
I do. But
I didn't think you did. But thank you for telling me. Thank you for telling me that you did.
The thing that's so weird for me that tugs at my heartstrings is most of my closest friends are Jewish, but I am also anti-Semitic. But it's because of my relationship with them, and I've really gotten to know. No, I think that...
You're saying some of your best friends are Jews. That's what you're saying to me.
Well, the thing that is weird to some extent, I haven't said this, and maybe you can unpack this to a certain extent, but I'm Lebanese, a quarter Lebanese. I don't really identify as any of that. It's my dad's dad. But I don't have a lot of Muslim or Arab friends. I definitely have some that I'm really close with. But I do have a lot more Jewish friends, and I do gravitate, especially towards Jewish men and women, because of a lot of different cultural things, including humor, including not being toxically masculine, and including just like this pursuit of critical thinking and stuff. I do that probably with a lot of people who are minorities or something, because I'm just more interested in them than the people that I grew up with necessarily. But so I sometimes, like, my empathies are, I think, are appropriate, but I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I'm not being, and by the way, not religious, certainly not part of any kind of religious group. So I sometimes do get confused. But when you're making the argument, this is what I want to get back to, that I feel what you did in your MSNBC piece, and I want you to try to be more specific, that we've been abandoned by our progressive allies. I want to drill down more on that, I guess. I think it's important. And I also think Elie Mystal's piece, which you ridiculed several times on Twitter, is 100% relevant.
It's an appalling argument. It's one of the grossest arguments I've seen since October 7th.
Okay. Well, I couldn't disagree more with you on that.
You want to go summarize it?
Well, you read the whole article, I imagine.
Yes, I did.
Okay. You want to summarize it, or do you want me to summarize it?
Well, I mean, look, first of all, it's filled with factual errors. I mean,
Biden's Israeli-Palestine policy could cost him the election. The president's blank check support of Israel's war on Gaza is alienating many of the black and brown voters he needs to win re-election.
So there are a few people I've seen on Twitter who more loudly declare that Democrats are going to abandon black people to win over white working class voters. And he rails against this. By the way, I happen to think he's right about. Now, he's right in the sense that they shouldn't do it. He's wrong in saying that Democrats are thinking of doing it. There's no evidence of that. But I agree that, like, the argument is that this certainly goes back to, I guess, 92 and Bill Clinton, this idea of triangulation, that you distance yourself from black voters in order to show yourself that you're not a party of black people for white working class voters, and then they'll be reassured enough to vote for your party. Right? That's an argument that was made 30 years ago. I don't think it's really as relevant today because the Democratic Party is so dominated by voters of color that it's really hard to imagine that happening. But the point is, he has made this argument that, how dare Democrats make a cynical political judgment and abandon black voters to win over white working class voters? And yet, the exact argument he is making is that Democrats should abandon maybe the most loyal constituency over time to Democrats, Jews, American Jews, in order for a cynical political effort to win, to reassure black and Arab voters that you're not too Jewish. You're not too supportive of Israel.
He doesn't say that. But
fucking gross argument. It's the most deeply cynical argument. And it's also one that is, politically, it's a stupid argument, right? You abandon Israel, you're going to lose Jewish support, which is frankly much more important than Arab support, considering the level at which Jews vote Democratic. But that is not that. Ignore that part. From a cynical standpoint, he's saying, don't do the right thing. Don't stand by your ally of 75 years. Don't remain loyal to a key constituency in your party that takes seriously support for Israel. Why? So you can win over a few Black and Hispanic Arab voters who, by the way, are wrong on this issue in order to win in 2024. So, if someone made the same argument that Ellie is making about Black people and white working class voters, he'd be railing against it, and rightfully so. And yet here he is making the argument. And my response to what he's saying is that I don't know what more evidence you need that a lot of people in the progressive community don't consider Jews an important part of the progressive community. They just don't, right? If you did, you would never say that. If you recognize that Jews are a fundamental core constituency of the progressive movement in this country and of the Democratic Party, you would never make that suggestion. Well, but if you don't, you would.
How about the specific point he makes? You're always really good at analyzing polling and different states and politics, certainly over time. And what he writes here when he enters your lane, I think it's fair to say, is he says in his article, when I read or listen to white people in the media talking about Biden's approach to the crisis, I've heard pundits call Biden's trip to Israel his finest hour. I'm left with the impression that they just don't know or haven't considered how electorally disastrous it could be for Biden to lose Muslim and Arab American support. There are over 200,000 Muslims living in Virginia, 150,000 Arab Americans in 2020. Biden won that state by only around 500,000 votes. Michigan, there are over 350,000 Muslims, 200,000 Arab Americans live in the state. Biden won that state by only 150,000 votes. Any significant weakening of this support puts Virginia in play and makes Michigan fundamentally unwinnable for Biden. And I shouldn't have to tell you that there's simply no math to Biden's electoral success without Virginia and Michigan. And he goes on and makes other points about other states.
It's such a stupid argument. And it's also one that, look, the idea that a year from now, that you're going to lose significant Arab support because you might lose some. The idea you're going to lose enough to cost your election seems suspect to me. Beyond that,
why? What if there's tanks and what if it's what if the war's still going on in Israel? We're seeing the violence, but it's possible that
it's possible. But first of all, let me make this point also. The way that what Ellie says in that piece, for example, he claims that U.S. is giving Israel a blank check. That's completely not true. It's absolutely not true. In fact, there's a piece today. I mentioned about it before I came on this call. At the Anthony Blinken at the Security Council, basically calling for Israel to allow a humanitarian pause. I mean, Biden went to Israel last week, and he basically asked the Israelis to allow more humanitarian supplies into Gaza, which they did. And, it's not a blank check. In fact, the U.S. has played a really huge, crucial role in pushing the Israelis to be more generous, but at least take into account humanitarian considerations in Gaza. So, what Elie Mystal clearly wants is for the U.S. to abandon Israel completely, right? What Biden is trying to do is navigate two very difficult situations here. One is Israel's legitimate right to defend itself against terrorism and protect its citizens, and also to limit civilian casualties in Gaza. Okay, I appreciate that. As a Jew, I appreciate it. As an American, I appreciate it. It's what he should be doing. But what Ellie is talking about and what a lot of Arab Americans are saying is, no, we don't want that. We want the U.S. not to support Israel. We want the U.S. to pressure Israel to allow a ceasefire, which would allow Hamas to remain in power, to continue plotting attacks against Jews. Okay? So that position is wrong.
That's not at all. He doesn't say that anywhere, and it's not what I heard.
It's the implicit argument.
I didn't hear that. I thought it was a very balanced, nuanced argument. It's a long article. I don't think he says that. Also, I would push back on.
So what does he want then? What does he want Israel the U.S. to do?
I'll tell you what I think is when you say we gave Israel a blank check, the U.S. did and Biden did. definitely think they did. Yeah, they let 20.
Not. That simply isn't
let me just
true.
say, they let 20 trucks in, but yesterday they bombed 300 places. Like, they're doing most whatever they want, yet we are the ones funding much of their security.
No, we're not. No, we're not.
$3 billion.
That's not much of it.
The entire Iron Dome.
To protect Jews against Hamas.
I'm not against it.
Wait, hold on.
Not against it.
No, stop. You're going to sit here and tell me there's something wrong with Hamas fired 3,000 rockets on October 7th into Israel. Many of those would have killed hundreds, if not thousands of people, if not for Iron Dome. You're saying something wrong with giving Iron Dome?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying
you just did say it.
No, I'm clearly not saying that. What I'm trying to say is America has a tremendous amount of influence on Israel and is not really using it. Is in fact
that is not true.
Wait,
I just gave you examples. It's simply not true.
I do not think that Israel is really listening to America a great deal. The American government.
You're 100% wrong, Pete. You can look
because
at the
Israel, America's not saying, the United States of America is not saying, the government is not saying, do not bomb all of northern Gaza. They're not saying, the argument, Biden's trying to take credit, and you are too, for 20 trucks. 20 trucks.
First of all, defense minister in Israel, Gallant, basically said this, that, why did you allow more humanitarian resources into Gaza? And by the way, I don't really understand why any country should allow humanitarian resources into a place that's basically at war with them. I've never heard that before, but whatever, different conversation. But Gallant said we did it because the U.S. asked us to, and we have no choice. They give us, they're our biggest supporter. We have to do what they ask us to do, right? So you had a big piece in the Times today, basically suggesting that that the U.S. is questioning Israel's a strategy for going into Gaza.
They are questioning.
Which means that they are by putting that in the paper, when the Times leaking it to the Times, they're saying to Israel, we don't like what you're doing, and we're trying to stop you from doing it. And the idea that they just said, Israel, do whatever you want, we'll support you, is simply not accurate. It's not an accurate description of what's happening right now. It isn't. And I think that where that argument comes from is a place that sees any support for Israel as a blank check.
I think there's a lot more nuance in what you're saying. Yes.
There's not a lot more nuance.
Yes.
For example, the people out there calling for a ceasefire, right, which I'm sure Ellie includes himself in, are people saying that Israel should do nothing?
No,
let me finish.
That is preposterous.
No, they're saying that Israel should accept Hamas remaining in power in Gaza.
Nope.
Because let me finish. There's no way to get Hamas out of Gaza without a military invasion. So the people calling for a ceasefire are basically saying Israel should put up with Hamas remaining in power, Hamas planning attacks, Hamas firing rockets every day since October 7th. They've been firing rockets into Israel. Israel should put up with that, okay, to prevent Palestinian civilians from being killed. What they're saying is they don't recognize and they won't acknowledge it implicitly is that Palestinian lives matter more than Israeli lives. Israel should put up with a threat from Hamas because we want to protect these people, who, by the way, Hamas has put at risk, not Israel.
I wouldn't.
No, not well.
Hamas has absolutely put their own people at risk and absolutely been responsible for most of their own people's death in so many different ways. But it doesn't mean that there's not responsibility that Israel can take, according, Michael, to most Israelis polled.
Of course, I agree with that. I haven't said I don't agree with that. Israel should make every effort to avoid civilian casualties. But what would you have Israel do?
I'm not.
Would you have them?
Listen, I think there's a huge gap between bombing. It seems indiscriminately because
it's not indiscriminate.
Well, there's not terror. There's not. These aren't all quote military targets.
You do realize that Hamas intermingles military targets among civilian locations.
I do realize that Hamas doesn't wear uniforms. They don't have buildings that say Hamas on them. They don't necessarily identify as Hamas. Of course I do. That's what makes it so difficult to fight against any insurgency or asymmetric warfare. That's why it's always been difficult for Israel, or else they would have eradicated Hamas a long time ago if they knew where they lived. But I think there's a long way between what seems like indiscriminate bombing, tons of bombing, destroying the infrastructure, destroying the buildings, destroying so many of the facilities that they have there. For what? Even if they don't kill people, they're destroying their homes. They're destroying their businesses. Like there's, I think there's a difference between ceasefire and what's happening. A huge difference.
I wrote this piece a couple days ago, and you can put it in the chat or whatever. But
I will not.
Basically making the argument. I will not
include any links to this piece.
Okay, making the argument that, I think a lot of the opposition to what's happening here is based on sort of this lefty kind of generalized disapproval of war. And I get that. I mean, I feel that often that sentiment also. And the left tends to be pro-peace, and they view any use of military force as somehow illegitimate. But the reality is that Israel's use of force against Hamas is legitimate. They have a right to defend their people. They have a right to root out Hamas. They don't have a right to kill people indiscriminately. And I would be the first person to criticize that if they were.
But they are.
But let me finish. Let me finish. This is an important point. The thing is about this is that war is bad. War is hell. People die in war. I wish it wasn't like that, but it is. And when you have a military organization, terrorist organization that puts itself basically among civilians and has no concern whatsoever of civilians being killed, civilians are going to die. This is a reality. I wish it wasn't like that. But the flip side is that if you do nothing, or if you don't allow Israel to counter Hamas, then Hamas will continue to do these kinds of attacks. They'll continue to fire rockets into Israel. They'll continue to plan these kinds of attacks to kill Israelis and kill Jews. So I don't know how you resolve that. There's no way to square this circle. There isn't.
There's a huge gap between the bombing and doing nothing.
What is that? Explain to me what that. Actually, you're even making an argument. Gap is actually, you're saying that we shouldn't invade. We shouldn't bomb. I mean, not we. I said Israel shouldn't bomb. Israel shouldn't invade. So how does Israel get rid of Hamas?
Listen,
do you think? Let me ask you a question, Pete. Do you think that Israel or any country in the world should tolerate having a terrorist organization that just killed 1,400 of its people along its border? Should they tolerate that?
No country in ever has or ever would. But tolerating that. So
what should Israel do?
Here, it's the idea.
You have this amorphous idea in your head that there is some humanitarian way to do this.
No. My concern is 100% that this is just going to continue the way it always has. All of this bombing, which is going to be the worst we've ever seen from Israel against Gaza, I'm sure if it hasn't already, is only going to create more people who think like Hamas.
I think that's I don't agree with that argument at all.
Okay. I think it certainly was true of America's reaction to 9/11.
Okay, but then you know what? America didn't get attacked after 9/11 in the United States, did it?
For sure.
Not once.
For sure, there was a tremendous amount of
22 years now. No major attack in the United States soil.
Well, no major attack, but there's always threats of foreign jihadists. They're usually pretty bad at it, luckily. But obviously,
that's for one thing. I'm saying my point is this.
But it's also different. But it's also way different. It's way different.
You can't stop a lone gunman, a lone terrorist, right? I mean, I think Jon Carroll made this point in 2004. This is the nuisance you have to put up with. He called it the nuisance, probably the wrong word, but this is kind of what you have to deal with when you deal with terrorism. But what you don't have to deal with if you get rid of Al-Qaeda is the kind of institutional planning that allows for this kind of terrible attack. And so, yes, there'll be people enraged by this. Will they have 3,000 rockets to fire into Israel? Will they be able to mobilize this kind of, advanced military operation that Hamas pulled off? Probably not. And so, from Israel's perspective, you deal with the enemy that you're facing. And right now, the enemy you're facing is entrenched in Gaza. It receives support from Iran and other countries. It has advanced weaponry. It has rockets. It has grenades. It has automatic rifles. It has RPGs, what have you. Just getting rid of that will go a long way toward minimizing, and by the way, eradicating Hamas political leadership will do a long way toward minimizing the military threat to Israel.
I hope I wish that were true. I believe it's going to create more people that will be more anti-Semitic, more anti-Israel around the world, because they'll see innocent people being killed. They'll see children being killed, and people will react the same way that innocent.
Okay, so to hear your argument here, like, okay, so Hamas killing Jews doesn't make people more anti-Arab, but Jews
It definitely does. No, I didn't say that. It definitely does.
What does that tell you about the nature of anti-Semitism?
No,
it's way more embedded.
No, it doesn't. That's of course it makes them more anti-Arab. 9/11 made this entire kit.
I haven't seen big demonstrations the big demonstration in London that I saw was pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas.
You don't think there's a lot of anti-Arab or anti-Palestinian attitude in America?
Of course there is.
Well,
I don't see people demonstrating on the streets. Do you?
What?
That's what you're referring to, aren't you? Aren't you referring to the global condemnation of? I mean, I think the polling
I'm referring to.
Hold on. The polling I saw in the UK, like in the Labour Party, was like 79%, 21% supporting Palestinians over Israel. On the left, I don't think you're right. I think the response on the left to this kind of violence is to view Israel negatively and view Jews negatively.
Well, I
don't see anyone tearing down posters of Palestinians in American cities and European cities. They're doing it to Israeli hostages. Posters of Israeli hostages.
I think that's reprehensible, and I don't. Who's putting up posters of kidnapped Palestinian people? I don't think if that were happening, I do not think that supporters of Israel will be tearing those posters down. Maybe, but I kind of doubt it. I don't think either. But, the one video I saw, again, it was a young Jewish student who was arguing with a young Israeli student. I think that there's so much complicated, even with the diaspora, about support for Israel because of what a lot of people see as the issues that the Palestinians are facing as a result of Israeli policy. And I think that you can have empathy for both sides, but I absolutely do believe that you.
Where's the empathy for Israel when people are tearing down these posters? Where's the empathy for Israel?
But when you make that argument, you disarm the person you're arguing because you're saying the person who tore down that poster didn't have the empathy. But what are you saying? That the vast majority of people think that that's okay? Or like the fact that people are selling all across my community blue and white bagels, right? Where I live in Rockland County. Like, no one's necessarily.
Those are Jews, I'm guessing, right?
The entire community is buying blue and white bagels. I imagine it's supporting the families or victims or some organization supporting Israel. I would imagine.
Look, I don't want to.
By the way, because I can't imagine like some deli, whether they're Jewish or not, selling blue and white bagels and then making a profit off of it, off of that would seem probably weird, right? But
look, I don't doubt the fact that there are plenty of righteous Gentiles and righteous liberals who are supporting Israel right now. But if you look at the public displays that have gone on over the past couple of weeks, it has been predominantly anti-Israel, predominantly. And I think that the thing that
but so much of that is Jewish people. I mean, a lot of Jew, not so much of it.
It's not.
A lot of Jewish people are against it because
you're out of your lane right now. You're out of your lane.
What do you say? No, I'm not out of my lane. You're saying no, because I've always been a critic. I've always been a critic of Israeli policy. Always. I've always been a stronger critic of Hamas. I think if they had taken what they were offered in 93, that was the best offer they ever got.
That was Arafat. That wasn't Hamas. Hamas has never acknowledged the right to Israel to exist.
And because after Arafat accepted that, what happened? It got squandered because of the extremists, because of Hamas, right?
Let me ask you a question in all seriousness. Okay, I'm curious about this.
Yeah.
What you've been critical of Israeli policy. Fine, I have too.
Never more than I've been critical of American policy.
I'm not a contest here. I'm just going to ask you this question. One of the criticisms of Israel is that Israel has this open air prison in Gaza that has put Gaza under siege. Do you think that what happened October 7th maybe at all changes your view as to why that was occurring and why it might have been necessary?
No.
Really?
No, because I think that there's a difference between offense and a difference between. You do think the Israeli government isn't purposely, according to the Israelis themselves, trying to make them suffer as so that they will stand up against Hamas and change their allegiances? Do you really think that preventing Palestinians from going to college or preventing Palestinians from having potato chips or getting water is humanitarian or ethical or Jewish?
The water thing I think
there's a difference between security and I think there's a difference between security precautions and not allowing them to have pipes that they turn into pipe bombs. I mean, I think that
there's video you can find of Hamas taking water pipes and turning them into rockets.
I know. I'm not saying, but that doesn't mean.
Let me finish the point. That people complain. People have said for years this is an open air prison. That it's a siege against Hamas. that it's intended, as you suggest right now, intended to hurt the Palestinian people on purpose. They'll rise against Hamas. And I would make the argument that the key motivation for Israel's policy toward Gaza is to protect Israelis. Now, you may not know this, but in the past 2 years, the Netanyahu government has basically loosened a lot of the rules as far as in Gaza. They've allowed many more Gazans to come into Israel to work, right? And part of that was because there was a general notion that Hamas had basically decided we're not going to get another war with the Israelis. Meanwhile, for the past 2 years, Hamas planned this attack. Okay, so at the same time that Israel is trying to loosen policies and make it life better for Gazans, what is Hamas spending its time on? Building rockets, building paragliders, planning military operations. So to me, one takeaway is that Israel's policy toward Gaza, while I can certainly point to the excesses and certainly point to things I don't agree with, generally speaking, was the right policy because Hamas was a clear and present threat.
No doubt
about it. To Israelis.
Again, two things can be true. Their security. Listen, if Israel took down the fences and the checkpoints and put down their guns, I think Hamas would do everything they could to extinguish them. I do think that. I do believe that. But I just want to be clear. The charges of anti-Semitism, like I'm always only referring to and depending on Jewish Israelis for my views.
What do you mean? I don't understand.
Meaning the debates on this issue, I focus mostly on Israelis debating Israelis, Jewish people talking to Jewish people, Dershowitz and Chomsky, Peter Beinart and
Dershowitz
anybody.
Is American, not Israeli.
Huh?
Dershowitz is American, so is Chomsky.
I'm talking Jewish people, two Jewish people. That amazing debate at Harvard years ago between Chomsky.
Between Chomsky and Dershowitz, I seriously doubt that.
You seriously doubt what?
That's a great debate.
Okay,
because I think both those guys are idiots.
Doesn't matter. They're both Jewish.
Not idiots. The point is, on this issue, they are.
The point is, Israelis are making these arguments. Israelis are saying our policies are both making us in many ways less safe.
Many Israelis, so that not the majority of Israelis.
But
most Israelis
I'm just saying, it's not like it's anti-Semitic or anti-Israeli. If you refer,
I'm not. Hold on, stop it. I'm not saying that's anti-Semitic. This argument that
the open air prison thing,
criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. That is okay. Some of it is.
The open air. You can find hundreds of thousands of quotes of Israelis referring to the subjugation of the people of Gaza as quote an open air prison.
So what? Who cares? I mean, you can find.
Just saying,
you can find those who say that.
When you make the argument,
American Jews, you can find American Jews who will go against their own people and protest Israel defending itself. That's fine.
It's not against. Hold on a second.
Jews.
How can you say? Can you say? I think this is interesting. And Rothkopf said this. I don't know what your thoughts are on his views. If you would, differentiate a lot. But he's like, I'm an American. I'm not Israeli.
Okay, that's true for me as well.
And so I'm making an argument from as an American, from an American point of view, on what I think about this. There's a lot of differentiation between the views of American Jews and Israeli Jews, or Israeli Jews and each other. About God, about the
I don't know how to respond to that. Of course, that's true.
About the specifics of the conditions in Gaza.
What I find really interesting about this conversation, Pete, is you're and this is something I notice a lot from non-Jews.
Yeah,
they continue to try to go-explain to me about what is and is not anti-Semitism. About what? No, I'm serious. This happens all the time.
I'm not going explaining. I'm telling you what I've learned. All I've done is interview Jewish people. So I'm just giving you their argument. So it's not me explaining to you.
What is their argument that's different than mine?
Do you think that you agree with David Rothkopf?
Probably.
Okay.
I would imagine. I don't look.
Do you think you agree with Tim Wise?
I don't know who that is. Right. Aaron David Miller. I bet that we agree on 99% of this issue.
You mentioned one more thing.
And I think Aaron David Miller and a lot of American Jews feel very frustrated and abandoned right now. Okay. These are conversations happening.
I've heard that. I agree with that.
Insight into Jewish Twitter, I guess, or Jewish.
I agree. I agree with that. That most of my feed of Jewish friends absolutely feel that way. I fully agree with that.
this is not like I'm not saying I speak for all American Jews, but I haven't found a single Jew that I've spoken to in the past 2 weeks who doesn't feel incredibly angry and frustrated by the response from people and organizations that they once considered allies. It's a real thing. And
not denying that at all.
Those people, let me finish. Doesn't mean that those people, including myself, are not critical of Israel. Look, I wrote a piece 10 years ago in the Washington Post calling for the U.S. to recognize a Palestinian state. Right? I'm as pro-Palestinian state as you can find. I shouldn't say as you can find, but I definitely am supportive of Palestinian self-determination. But, that doesn't obviate the fact that I also think there should be a Zionist state in Israel. And a lot of people who I thought were my allies don't think that way. And frankly, when Jews were massacred, did not stand with us, stand with the Jew, not with Israel, but with the Jews in America, Jews who feel absolutely anguished by this. And the thing is, look, people can do what the hell they want to do. What I hear from a lot of people is that a lot of Jews is like, we allied ourselves with Black Lives Matter, with other civil rights movements. And when our people were being targeted, we felt like they did not have our back. Now, look, here's one thing I'll say to you. This is not just because of Israel. I've been making this point about American Jews and anti-Semitism on the left for years now, right? That is a real issue. I don't think that all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. A lot of it is, but not all criticism is anti-Semitic. But, I think what it comes down to is that we feel abandoned. We feel betrayed by people who we thought were our allies. That if they can't condemn this, they can't condemn the murder of children, this kind of barbarism. I think a lot of us feel like that's because
but no one's not. I find that to be explain. Who's not condemning it?
Pete, you know what? You're not Jewish.
Who's not?
So you don't see it the same way that I do. But you don't.
Of course I don't.
You're trying to explain it to me like you are Jewish, and you don't see it like I do, and like other Jews see it. And I love you, Pete. You know that I love you. But there's something a little presumptuous about telling me what is or is not anti-Semitism, what is or is not a lack of alliance or.
I'm not telling you. I'm telling you from the point of view of Jewish people that I've talked to and that I've heard that do not share your sentiment. Now, just to be clear, I don't come in here. I don't come talk to.
I find it hard to believe that Aaron David Miller and Dave Rothschild don't share that view.
I guarantee. I guarantee. Then come on with both of them.
Okay, be happy to.
Great.
I think they would be quite understanding of the sense of anger that a lot of American Jews feel.
People, help me understand this. Who's not condemning the massacre? Who's not? Who is it that's not condemning it? Who?
Are you being serious right now?
Like what people, what pundits, what leaders, what organizations?
I'm not going to get into this about naming names.
Well, you're making the accusation. You're so outraged that people aren't condemning it. I've heard everybody condemn it.
Excuse me.
Everybody's condemned it.
I didn't say that. Pete, you're putting words in my. I didn't say people aren't condemning it.
You literally just said our allies are not condemning the massacre, and I'm flabbergasted by that statement.
Well, some people aren't.
Who?
DSA did not. Those students up at Harvard did not. The people demonstrating in the streets and calling for an intifada are not. The people who are demonstrating college campuses and saying, let me finish, and saying, from the river to the sea, which is basically meaning no Jewish state would exist, they're not condemning it. But then I hear the equivocation from people. Equivocation from people who basically say, well, oh, this is terrible, but, Israel brought it on itself, or somehow this is Israel's fault, or, what else do you expect Hamas to do? Which, by the way, is a racist statement toward Palestinians. So it's on a spectrum, I would say. You're right that lots of people have condemned it, but what I am troubled by is the sort of moral equivalency people are making between Israel and Hamas, and that is a false moral equivalency.
I don't know who's making.
Israel does not go in and kill children. Okay, they do not go in and they do not purposely.
But they do. But that doesn't. But I'm not sure why that matters.
That is an important distinction to make.
Every time this happens, Palestinian children die. Every time.
So let me ask you a question. Al Qaeda killed women and children, anybody they could on 9/11. When the U.S. responded in Afghanistan, we killed lots of civilians, including, I'm sure, children.
Yep.
Are we equivalent to Al Qaeda?
I don't think that anybody's making the equivocation. I'm saying
I think they are.
The end result.
Actually, I know they are, Pete. I know they are.
I think the people that are saying that babies dying is bad, can we all agree on that, are right? You don't?
Of course, babies dying are bad.
Well, that's what I'm hearing.
But there's a significant difference between organizations and groups that target children and those that go out of their way not to, and who may, not on purpose, harm civilians. There is a difference.
I have a hard time
between Israel, the U.S. and Al Qaeda. Even though we both killed, even though the U.S. killed civilians and Al Qaeda killed civilians, we are smart enough to make these distinctions in our mind. We should be able to make these distinctions. And if you are being honest about what is happening in Israel, then you make a distinction between the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and Hamas, because they're not the same. And I've seen lots of people, and by the way, people who accuse Israel of genocide, which is just factually wrong and just an incredibly
I wanted to ask you about that, but I don't know how much time you have.
Yeah, go ahead. Come on. I'm loving this. Let's go.
Well, the genocide question, you won't even allow for it to be mentioned in comments on your Substack.
No, I will not. It's disgusting. It's not true. Look, let me give you an example of this. Last week, Israel basically told people in northern Gaza to move because there was going to be an attack. Okay, people complain about this, claimed it was a war crime to take people out of harm's way. Whatever Israel does, they get blamed for it. If you're telling civilians to escape for their own security, that's not genocide. It just isn't.
It is if you don't let them.
They did let them. Hamas were the ones who were trying to stop them. They put up roadblocks to stop them.
No one's shouldn't be defending them. But
you probably don't know this because it hasn't been reported at all. But Israel has consistently sent emails and text messages to Gazans telling them to escape, to leave because there's going to be an Israeli military attack. They dropped leaflets. No, you can say that's not good enough. Fine, that's a reasonable argument. Maybe it's not good enough. But the argument, these are things you can see evidence of this. They have made significant effort to protect civilian lives. And that is the opposite of what Hamas is doing. So you can't call that genocide. And by the way, to use genocide after literally a genocidal style attack by Hamas against Jews in Israel is fucking disgusting. I'm sorry, it really is.
What do you make?
You're making an equivalency between what Hamas did and what Israel is doing.
What do you make of?
I reject that.
What do you make of the phrase ethnic cleansing and its equivalent or similarity to genocide? Same thing.
Same thing. Although, I mean, obviously, you can make the argument, and I don't think it's unfair argument, that Israel ethnically cleansed parts of what are modern day Israel in 1948, pushing Palestinians out of what was then Israel. I think that's a legitimate accusation and one that Israel has to bear responsibility for. No question about it. But in the current context, no, I don't accept that.
The UN defines genocide as a coordinated plan to destroy. Do you care about the UN's definition of genocide?
I do, actually.
The UN defines genocide as a coordinated plan to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, religious, or racial group by killing, causing seriously bodily harm or mental harm, preventing births within a group, removing children from a group, inflicting life conditions designed to bring about destruction. In today's Ezra Klein has on Peter Beinart and Spencer Ackerman, and Spencer laid out 4 different kind of maybe results that could happen here, and his 4th was ethnic cleansing.
He's wrong. I don't have to say he's wrong.
I think that's
ridiculous.
I think
Peter Beinart is somebody. I'm not going to get into.
Okay, but I think that's fair to say that someone's wrong. But I feel like it's worth debating.
If you can debate it, I mean,
but you won't let it be debated. You said don't even mention it in my comments.
What, genocide?
Which I, by the way, think is super ballsy that you're doing what you're doing with your Substack and I'm doing what I'm doing, and you're wholly dependent on subscribers, and you might really piss them off. But
I've lost subscribers.
You're never afraid. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but you're never afraid to do that.
I don't give a shit. And if they're bothered by what I'm writing, then they shouldn't subscribe to my site.
Yeah, you're better than me.
I mean, I'm sorry. I'm going to write what I think is correct. If they don't like it, then they can go find someone else.
I don't know if that's...
I'm sure they can find plenty of people who agree with them.
Okay, so that's the point I was making, that you won't allow it to be discussed so that you can debate it. when it does seem,
I find it to be grossly look. You don't think the accusation of genocide against the Israel is an absurd argument.
You don't think?
And by the way, just for the record, you mentioned before about cutting off water and fuel supplies, which we can debate whether that was appropriate or not. The very fact that Israel is providing water and fuel to Gaza, which is life-sustaining, would suggest that they're not actually carrying out a genocide against Palestinians in Gaza.
I don't know if you get a lot of credit for providing water to anybody. Everybody gets water. No? Everybody does not get water.
People throw the word genocide around and they have no idea what it even means.
Fair enough, but do you not think? I agree with you
about the Holocaust. Okay, what happened in the Holocaust? Literally, Jews were taken in trains, shipped to camps, brought into gas chambers, gassed to death, and killed. If you think, hold on. If you think that's happening in Gaza, respectfully, you're a fucking idiot.
No, come on. But that's
not you.
No, you could say that if you. I won't be offended. But what I'm hearing is tons of Israeli military leaders and certainly Israelis using that type of terminology.
No, they're not. They have not
used the terminology of eradication and ethnic cleansing forever. Some of them.
They're not using it now.
There's no Israeli leaders that are talking about wiping out the Palestinians.
There are Israeli politicians who have said that. Absolutely.
Well, then why isn't it fair to be concerned that Israel is going to wipe out the Gaza? I mean, and they are their homes, their businesses.
I'm not going to argue with you about what might or might not happen. I'm going to argue with you about facts and evidence. And there's no evidence or facts that Israel is carrying out a genocide against Palestinian people. You want to talk about written documents? Go read fucking Hamas's charter, which basically calls for the eradication of all Jews and the wiping out of Israel. That is genocide. Last time I checked.
No doubt, but we're not arguing that and not defending Hamas. We're saying,
but the point is, you have to. If you think that is what Israel's policy is, you don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know that it's their policy, but I think
it's not their policy.
Well, genocide isn't, but they are destroying the entire. No, there are a tremendous amount of the properties, the businesses, the buildings, and the homes.
That's genocide now.
It's one definition.
Were we carrying out genocide against the Germans and the Japanese when we attacked them in World War II? I mean, what are you talking about? This is war, Pete. You're confusing war with genocide.
Yeah, I think that.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. When in 2016, when the U.S. supported Iraq as it liberated Mosul from ISIS, was that genocide? 6,000 civilians were killed. Was that genocide?
I don't recall that conflict. I don't know anything about that conflict, so I'm not.
Okay, well, you should. It's an interesting one because it has a lot of parallels to this current conversation. In 2016, ISIS controlled.
Oh, ISIS!
The
I don't know why.
city of Mosul in Iraq.
I didn't know. I didn't know you said ISIS. I was listening to. Right. I heard something else. The Battle of Mosul, 2016, 2017.
Yes.
Was between ISIS and the Iraqis.
Yes, with U.S. military support.
Uh-huh.
And the Iraqis went in and they basically eradicated ISIS from Mosul, destroyed the city in the process, killed, I think it was like 6,000 civilians, maybe more. I didn't hear anybody complain at the time about Iraqi genocide. I didn't hear anybody complain about Iraq's killing of civilians. Nobody gave a shit. But now, when Israel does it to defend itself against a similarly murderous genocidal regime, organization, now it's genocide. Now it's a human right. It's a war crime. I mean, this is ISIS.
If you look up
and how people talk about Israel,
if you look up ISIS genocide, you find a lot.
You do, which is why the people didn't complain about it, because people said, ISIS is pretty fucking bad. We got to get rid of those people. We support Iraq in doing what they're doing. How are they different from Hamas?
I don't think anybody's saying that they're different from. I think people are making the comparisons, but we're not talking about Hamas. We're talking about
the fact that people are calling this Israel defending itself as a war crime, and they were silent about what happened in Mosul, makes my point that there is a double standard in how people talk about these issues. Going after ISIS and killing lots of Iraqi civilians, that was okay for a lot of these same woke progressives who now think it's ethnic cleansing and genocide. When Israel's doing it, it's the worst thing in the world.
I don't know I don't know who those people are, and I think that you should call them out.
I mean,
the same woke progressive. Like, I don't know. We talked about all these.
I've literally named for you.
You named a whole bunch of like college
organizations.
students.
I've named. I could name.
You named DSA, Black Lives Matter. Generally speaking, young activists. But I'm talking about pundits, columnists, policymakers.
How about Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman from Michigan, who still 6 days later still has a post on her Twitter feed blaming Israel for the hospital bombing, which was actually a parking lot bombing in Gaza. How about that?
Sure, name her. Yes, but who else? Like in Congress, on TV, columnists that you sometimes disagree with. Like I feel like the progressive movement, when you're talking about it, these same progressives, I want to know kind of who we're talking about other than young activists, which I think is fair to discuss and debate and find out who they were. Also find out how many of them actually believe that.
I just named you a member of Congress.
Yes, and I agree with you.
There's a letter that was signed. I could look, if you want, I'm happy after we get off this call to go through my Twitter feed and find you all the names of people who have said really gross, awful things about what's happening.
Well, I would love to read that piece in your Substack because I feel like you referenced it, made similar arguments, but I wasn't sure who.
I mean, I don't know what I think I have referenced it. I mean, these are. I mean, you had literally demonstrations in campuses in Stanford, at Columbia, at Harvard, in the city of Dearborn, Michigan. There's a huge demonstration that was pro-Hamas. You've had a member of Congress, Rashida Tlaib. You've had Ilhan Omar make these comments as well. You had Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts basically ignore the civilian violence, calling for a ceasefire. You've had, I could name you practically every Guardian columnist that exists who's made these comments. I mean, it is like, I can't believe I have to justify or legitimize what I'm saying when the evidence is so overwhelming that there are people out there on the left who are not only making equivalency between Israel and Hamas, but are accusing Israel of genocide. And yes, some of them are Jews. They're the only ones.
They're the only ones I'm referencing.
Peter Beinart. I'm just saying had the absolute chutzpah to compare the people who in the Capitol asking for a ceasefire to Jewish freedom riders in the 1960s, which is, I mean, so appalling. I don't even know where to start. How about every single person who writes for Jewish Currents or If Not Now? Both organizations, which If Not Now, which is a Jewish organization, put out a message after the incident, the massacre, and blamed Israel. Israel. Jewish Voices for Peace held a rally in Brooklyn, not far from where I live, calling End Genocide in Gaza. I named them for you. Is that good enough?
I don't think so. But I looked up Ayanna Pressley in a statement. Let me make it plain. The murder of innocent Israeli civilians by Hamas is horrific and unacceptable. And the murder of innocent Palestinian civilians is horrific and unacceptable response from Israel.
I mean, that's my point. She's making a disgusting moral equivalency. She is. You have to differentiate this. One of them is a terrorist attack against civilians. One of them is legitimate self-defense.
Yeah, I don't think that it is. I don't think it's ever been. I don't think. Not only do I not think it's legitimate self-defense, I think it continues to create more hatred and violence toward Israel, the same way the United States of America.
It creates hatred in Israel toward Israel because people are making a false equivalency.
No, because they're killing innocent people with bombs.
It is like saying, and I'll use my example again, it's bad when Al-Qaeda flies planes into buildings. It's also bad when the U.S. goes to war in Afghanistan and kills civilians. Those two things are not the same, and you know that. They're not the same. And we are smart enough and discriminating against to understand the difference between those
I think the better example is after 9/11, the United States invaded Iraq, thus squandering the sympathy of the world. And that's why I think
I'm not talking about Iraq.
Well, I am.
I'm not talking about Iraq.
You don't want to.
Because there I agree with you.
But you don't want to. Why did Abu Ghraib and Gitmo set America back in national security in big ways?
You're making a different argument. And I'm trying to localize this because Afghanistan is important because it was the response to the people who carried out, 9/11. That I'm making that distinction because that is what's happening in Gaza right now.
Iraq was a response to the people who carried out 9/11.
He wasn't, because they weren't responsible for 9/11.
Well,
it was.
That's how they convinced That's how they convinced the American public. You know this.
Of course I do, and it was awful. But I'm saying
that's my argument. When you react, when you are the victim of violence, and then you commit more violence against innocent people, it makes it hard to get the sympathy and support from the world community. I'm not saying you do nothing. I'm saying the reaction to 9/11 from the national security experts that I've interviewed for years and years, including, I'm pretty sure you, was the solution should have been police action, not military.
What, in Afghanistan or Iraq?
All of it, really. I mean, you could send in special forces.
I'm running a project right now looking at the history of the war in Afghanistan. So I don't know if I agree with that argument.
Wait, you're looking at what through the war in Afghanistan?
The history of the U.S. war in Afghanistan. But the point I'm going to get to here.
Wait, how are you going to end that? Because the United States invaded Afghanistan to get rid of the Taliban, and 20 years later, after billions of dollars in an occupation,
this is a whole other conversation.
It doesn't work.
Actually, you know what, Pete? Hold on. I have a piece coming out on just this issue later this week. Have me back on and talk about that piece.
We are so booked out. I'm sorry, what? We're booked? We're so booked. I was just talking to my producer. Do you have any time to talk? Do you want to say a final word about this? Call me a goy or an unsympathetic?
No. I want to get this Iraq point. Okay. The conflation you're making is an inaccurate conflation. It would make sense if Israel invaded Iraq or Israel invaded Iran. Then you could make that argument. What I'm trying to get at here is that the U.S. response to 9/11 in Afghanistan was a legitimate act of self-defense against a group that had attacked and killed Americans. So I think you have to make the comparison between that behavior and between that action and the Israeli response to what Hamas did. Those I think when you bring in Iraq, you conflate something that's very different. What I'm trying to argue here is that there's legitimate right of self-defense that all countries have. Israel is no different. Israel's right to defend itself against a group that would kill innocent Israeli civilians. And that's the conflation that I have a problem with. And the quote here from Rihanna Presley makes my point. She's treating those two decisions, one, the Hamas attack and the U.S. response, as somehow equal. It's like saying that the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor is no different from the U.S. attack against civilian targets or I should say firebombing in Tokyo and so on. And my point, the thing is, those are two very different events and precipitated by different factors. And so I just think you have to be careful making those kind of conflations. And when you make those conflations, it makes Israel's right of self-defense seem like a war crime, which it's not. It's a right that every country has, that we have, that Ukraine has. Ukraine's using right now as they should. Every country right to defend itself. But Ukraine
isn't bombing civilian Russians.
Well, that's because Russia invaded their country.
I'm not saying they're doing anything wrong. I frankly support.
But the principle is that countries should be able to defend themselves.
I think that the problem is the comparison.
I'm sorry.
In that Israel and Hamas are not Russia, Ukraine, U.S., Afghanistan, the conflicts, the history, the situation. And if we talk, I guess I want to have the conversation always from the point of, in this case, the Israeli national security. What is the best way for the Israeli people to be and feel safe? And
for Hamas not to exist.
Right. Fully agree. But they do exist. They have existed. If Israel could get rid of them.
For now they do.
If Israel could have ever gotten rid of them, they would have.
No, they wouldn't have, because for exactly the reasons why it's so difficult to do it now, because it is very difficult to get rid of Hamas. And one of the reasons they didn't do it is because they would have faced the same kind of condemnation and scrutiny that they're facing today.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have thought they would have gotten less scrutiny and condemnation after the murder of 1,400 Jews, but I guess not. I mean, theoretically, people should be a little bit more understanding of Israel's right to self-defense after this kind of grievous of a massacre, and yet they're not. They're making these gross moral equivalencies between, an unprovoked terrorist attack that targeted civilians and the right that every sovereign country has to defend itself.
I think I get lost when you say the right to self-defense, which I fully agree, but that's not what I see them doing. I see them putting themselves in more danger by killing innocent civilians.
I mean, how can you say that?
Because it's the way the world has always worked.
No, it's not the way the world has always worked. We got rid of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and we didn't have another terrorist attack from al-Qaeda in 22 years since. This idea that attacking terrorists always boomerangs against you is just bullshit. It's not even true, right? We helped Iraq get rid of ISIS. Guess what? ISIS doesn't really exist much anymore.
Al-Qaeda is not Hamas, Michael.
I'm sorry?
Al-Qaeda is not Hamas.
How are they different? Yeah, they're much worse. They're much, 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 much worse.
Who's worse?
They're embedded in Palestinian society. They have a government, not a safe haven.
That's why I think it's a lot more complicated. That's why the idea that you could beat Al-Qaeda is far more simplistic in a way than you can Hamas. It's just...
Okay, use ISIS then. Use ISIS.
I don't want to use anybody but Hamas. I just want to take the...
Why? You're making the argument that... No. Yeah. Pete, you're making the argument that these things always end disastrously. And I'm saying that's not true at all. Then disastrously... I can name you multiple conflicts. I think, in which
Michael,
Sri Lanka,
with
Algeria,
all due respect,
let me think. What else?
If you're talking about 9/11, it has ended disastrously for Americans.
You're conflating.
No, I'm not. The reaction to 9/11 was a war in Iraq. It was. You can't say it wasn't. It was, and as a result, an entire generation of American veterans has been destroyed, and millions of Iraqis died.
Stop. Take Iraq off the table.
No, I will not take Iraq off the table because it was an overreaction to 9/11, which is exactly what I'm seeing happen here.
Because I have to explain this to you again, but I'm sorry to say this again and repeat myself. The war in Afghanistan, the initial offensive that the U.S. fought in the war on terrorism, I hate the name of it, whatever, was against a group of individuals, an organization that targeted Americans. Legitimate act of self-defense that any country has the right to. Okay? That's what Israel is doing in Gaza right now. The Iraq war was a mistake. It was an overreaction. It was a disaster. It would be akin to Israel invading Iran, which supports Hamas, which if it happened, I'd be the first person to condemn it. Okay? Not the first, but I'd be in the top 100. Okay,
I would argue
you can't compare these two things.
Yeah, you can. Just take Afghanistan. How are you going to make this argument when 20 years and billions of millions of dollars, and you're talking about Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda has morphed into competitive offshoots, and the Taliban is back.
I'll tell you why. Because we defeated Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in 2 months, in December 2001.
We did not defeat them.
Let me finish. Because I know this history better than you do, Pete. So this is why you have me on the show.
I don't know about that, but...
Yeah, no, I do. I spent the last year and a half researching this, so I know what I'm talking about. We defeated Taliban. We defeated Al-Qaeda. Taliban tried to surrender to President Karzai. We rejected it. We snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. But as far as initially undoing Taliban rule, we were successful. As far as taking away safe haven for Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, we were successful. It's what we did after that blew everything up. Okay? So... This is, and I wrote a whole piece about this. You can read it tomorrow when it comes out, or later in the week, hopefully. The point is that this is why I agree with you that Israel should not overreact. I agree with you.
Too late.
But it's not too late. You're saying, your argument basically is Israel does not have the right to go after militarily people responsible for killing 1,400 Israeli citizens. That is an absurd argument. I'm sorry, it is.
It's not my
no
argument.
Country in the world,
not
no
my argument.
Country in the world, none. If Mexican drug cartels invaded Southern California and killed 40,000 Americans, which would be the approximate number of, if you did it by population of Israelis who were killed, and then took hostages across the border, would you be suggesting that the U.S. should do nothing in response?
Well, I'm pro-cartel.
I'm sorry?
I'm pro-cartel.
I know you are. Having said that, imagine you're not pro-cartel for a second. Would you suggest
America
has no right to respond to that?
I would suggest your analogy is poop.
What? I give up. All right, I'm done. You're just being difficult.
No, I'm not.
Obviously, it's a fair analogy to make.
I don't think it is. Why?
Why is it not a fair analogy?
Because I don't agree with the way that I feel like you see the national security solutions as always being, in this case specifically, a military solution that requires the type.
I don't always see that.
How about this? What if there were a military solution? What if the reaction here by Israel, this They have every right to defend themselves, was something that was still military. It was still guns. It was still bombs, but it was different.
What would that be?
I don't know. The Israeli people seem to not want anything right now because they have hostages. So that would seem like a smart bet to me, but maybe not.
That's not an accurate description.
I don't know. I mean, there's plenty of different ideas that get presented by Israelis on this in this case.
Not when look, you can't get rid of Hamas. We've seen this for 15 years. You can't get rid of Hamas without invading.
Well, part of the reason why you can't get rid of Hamas is because there's certain elements of the Israeli government that want them there. No?
Not anymore. Not anymore.
Well, not anymore, but Netanyahu certainly empowered them, no?
We already had this conversation like an hour ago. I agree with you. That's a criticism of Netanyahu, but that has changed. And I don't agree with Netanyahu, and most Israelis don't agree with Netanyahu. Look, you can argue all you want to about what happened in the past. What happened now is what matters. And I'm sorry you don't like my Mexico analogy, but it's the perfect analogy for the situation. My point is, I'm making that is that any country that was attacked in the way Israel was attacked would respond. And not just, by the way, out of vengeance, but to protect its citizens, right? And so if Hamas remains in power after what they just did, it leaves Israelis at risk. By the way, Israelis who are still under rocket fire right now, without Iron Dome, which you seem to hate.
I don't.
Dead.
I like right? Iron Dome.
You criticized Iron Dome.
No, I
You did.
I think Iron Dome.
The tape, Pete. You did.
I said.
If anyone's still watching this, by the way, now they're gonna be like, you know what, Pete? You did say that. Dude, I heard you say it.
First of all, you know, and this is like really offensive, that I have an Iron Dome tramp stamp tattoo. You're the only person. You gave it to me, and yet here you are. Listen, I gotta let you go. I have to go pick up my daughter. I want to end by saying, I appreciate you. I appreciate your feelings, your emotions around this. I apologize if I came off as in any way to you or anybody as insensitive. I would never be what I want.
You're asking questions.
And
look, I get it. You're wrong, but you're asking questions.
Long live Hamas. I want to, who has done like the best journalism on that organization and its influence on Palestine?
Read Yair Rosenberg's piece of What Hamas Wants. It's a great piece. And he makes a very smart argument as to Hamas has been very clear what they want to do, which is kill Jews.
He sounds Jewish.
He is Jewish.
I appreciate all of it, buddy.
And I guarantee you he agrees with me on this issue.
I'm going to have you and Ellie Mistal on. That should be good. I'll just sit back.
Oh, yeah, that'll be fun.
I'll just sit back. All right, let's talk next week or whenever that piece comes out. And I really appreciate you today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right, there he goes, Michael Cohen, everybody. Are you enraged? Are you still there? Hello? Did you leave? Thank you very much for listening today. I would love to hear your reactions to it. standupwithpete@gmail.com. And I will be right back here tomorrow. I've got Glenn Kirshner set to join me, and I'm sure there will be more. Always want to know who you want me to talk to, so reach out, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Did I mention that? And support us, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. All right, that's it. Jon Carroll always supporting us with this great theme song, In and Out, JonCarroll.org. Take it away, Johnny.
Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up. Stand up. Point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. wishing for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it is time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand